Now that you have some research questions in mind, it's time to move on to step 2 of archaeological inquiry. And that step is developing our research design. This is a major step. It's where we take our research question and ask ourselves, okay, now how am I actually going to carry out my study in order to answer this research question? We move from the abstract to the concrete, and we often have to be very pragmatic about decisions relating to budget, time, and labor. We can't dig every square inch or metric ton of earth up in order to answer our research question. We have to be strategic. Moreover, we have to let our professional ethics guide us. Although archaeological excavation can be a lot of fun, excavation is a destructive activity. Remember our activities yesterday about the importance of archaeological context, that is, the original location of where an artifact is discovered and its relationship spatially to other artifacts at the site. While excavating a site gives us a chance to document that context, it also destroys that context in the process. You only get one chance to excavate a specific artifact. Once it's been excavated, you can't rewind time and put it back in the earth in its original context. You can't reconstruct the archaeological record perfectly. And so we have to be really thoughtful about our goals and balancing our desire to answer our research question with the reality that we will be permanently impacting that archaeological site for the future. Archaeological ethics have changed immensely over the past 100 years, even just over the past few decades. Today, the Society for American Archaeology, the professional organization that guides much of United States archaeological practice, lays out 9 principles of archaeological ethics. Principle number 1 is stewardship, which states that the archaeological record is irreplaceable. It is the responsibility of all archaeologists to work for the long-term conservation and protection of the archaeological record by practicing and promoting stewardship of that archaeological record. In other words, excavating isn't the point. Answering as many research questions isn't the point. And getting fancy artifacts into museums isn't the point. Archaeologists are primarily tasked with stewarding the archaeological record. And this responsibility of stewardship is of even greater importance at sites of special significance to stakeholder communities. For instance, on the left is a photograph of a medicine wheel at the Medicine Mountain National Historic Landmark, an archaeological site that spans over 4,000 acres in present-day Wyoming. This site has been used as a sacred site by many Native American tribes over hundreds of years. As part of its site stewardship, excavation is not permitted. Visitors are prohibited from taking prayer offerings, and the site is sometimes closed to visitors during certain Native American rituals. In this example, the benefit of stewarding the archaeological site as an active sacred site for Native American tribes outweighs any research question that an archaeologist may want to pose about the site that could destroy it. Military battlefields are another example of archaeological sites that often merit special ethical consideration. And that's because these are sites where human violence and death have taken place. Many times, casualties are buried in unmarked graves, sometimes en masse. These sites may be considered hallowed ground by contemporary descendants, military veterans, and others. Archaeologists and historians investigating such sites should approach them with the dignity and respect they deserve. And this, of course, brings us to human remains, which is a sensitive topic because of the moral, spiritual, and cultural values associated with the dead. Think of the phrase, rest in peace. Does archaeological excavation allow for peaceful rest? Today, many people would say no. And we have a suite of federal and state laws that now protect human remains and their burial sites. So contemporary American archaeologists do not excavate human remains except under very special circumstances, and often at the bequest or in close consultation with key stakeholder communities. So now that we've discussed a bit about archaeological ethics, we can return to our research design. This time, we know that we're going to be using the principle of stewardship to guide our decisions. And because we're studying Mount Independence, which was technically not a battlefield, but was certainly a site that saw a lot of death and misery, we know that we must be mindful and respectful of that legacy. You've already started on your research design by conducting some background research on the site. You've completed your required readings, and you've listened carefully to Ennis's presentations. Archaeologists spend a lot of time doing such research. We read archaeological reports from previous excavations, as well as historical studies. We comb through archives for primary historical documents, and we look at maps and consider a lot of environmental data, such as soils, vegetation, slope, and access to water. All of this background research then helps us to complete our research design. Now that we know as much as we can about the historical and environmental context of our site, we have to determine what type of data we need in order to answer our research question. For instance, if we want to know whether the hospital was used at Mount Independence to treat wounded or sick soldiers, then the type of data we would want to look for are late 18th century artifacts that are related to medicine and health. What type of artifacts would you expect to find? And what type of artifact will allow you to say, aha, here's a hospital that was prepared to treat the wounded? Now that you know what you're looking for, you have to determine where to look and how to look for those items. Remember back to the investigation of the Battle of Valcour Island. The archaeologists set up a grid over the area they thought was where the American line was located, and then used metal detectors to identify ferrous, that is iron-rich, artifacts. This is an example of sampling, and in archaeology, we use sampling a lot. Why? Well, remember, we can't dig up every square inch or metric ton of soil. In the case of Valcour, sampling was done by focusing on those metal objects that would set off a metal detector. There could have been some other non-metal objects that weren't found, but the sampling strategy was chosen as a matter of balancing the research objective with the pragmatics of time, money, and labor. The team knew that metal detectors would be expedient survey devices, and that the majority of ordnance and weaponry of the time would probably set off such metal detectors, allowing the crew to map the detritus of military combat. So now it's your turn. Choose one of your research questions and think about what type of archaeological data you would need to answer that question. What artifacts would you want to find? Where would you look for that data? Where do you think those artifacts are located on the site? And what would your sampling strategy be? You can't dig it all up. So how do you decide? How are you going to sample your area of focus? And finally, consider your plan in terms of ethics. How will your research impact the archaeological site itself?